Marcus had never imagined that his life would bring him to a world like Velara. From the moment his ship landed, he felt the strangeness of the air, the pull of gravity that was just a little heavier than Earth's, and the way the sky carried, a faint silver hue even during the day. The mission he was on was not one of conquest or war, but of peace. Humanity and the people of Velara had fought too many battles already, and both sides were weary of bloodshed. Now he was chosen as one of the soldiers to escort the diplomats, ensuring no one made a foolish move that might ignite the conflict again. He had been trained for war, for defense, for survival, but never for what he was about to face. When Marcus entered the grand hall of the Velaran palace, the sight almost stole his breath away. The walls shimmered with carvings that seemed to move when the light struck them, telling ancient stories of battles, victories, and the rise of their royal family. Tall pillars shaped like spiraling trees reached high into the ceiling, glowing faintly as though alive. But none of this beauty compared to the figure who stood at the far end of the hall, Princess Kaelira. She was not like the women of Earth, nor like the stories he had heard whispered in soldier camps. She was taller than most men he knew, dressed in gleaming armor that curved gracefully around her form. The armor was silver, laced with deep blue patterns that glowed softly, marking her as someone of great importance. Her face was hidden behind a helmet with a narrow visor, but even without seeing her features, Marcus felt the weight of her gaze. It was piercing, sharp, and curious all at once. The other humans with him shifted nervously. The Velarans were a proud people, known for their skill in combat and their fierce sense of honor. No human dared to step too close or to speak out of turn. Yet Kaelira walked forward, her steps calm, the clink of her armor echoing in the vast hall. She stopped, in front of Marcus, her visor reflecting his image back at him like a mirror. "Human soldier," she said, her voice firm, yet not unkind. "You stand before the house of Velara. Do you come in strength or in fear?" The question seemed simple, but Marcus knew it was a test. He had been briefed about their ways. The Velarans respected strength, but not arrogance. They despised weakness, but they valued honesty. If he answered wrong, it could shatter the fragile truce his people had worked so hard to build. Marcus drew a steady breath. "I come in neither," he replied slowly. "I come in duty, to guard peace, not break it." For a long moment, Kaelira did not move. Then she tilted her head just slightly, as if considering him more deeply than she expected to. Her silence was louder than words, making even the alien guards behind her shift uneasily. But finally she stepped aside, allowing Marcus and the others to pass. That should have been the end of it. A small test, a short meeting, and then nothing more. Yet, Marcus felt her eyes on him even as he walked past. He tried to ignore it, but the sensation clung to him like a shadow. Over the next days, the peace talks continued. Humans and Velarans sat together, speaking through translators, debating terms, and carefully avoiding words that might reopen old wounds. Marcus remained at his post, quiet and observant, but his attention often wandered toward the princess. She was always present, standing tall behind her mother, the queen. She rarely spoke, but when she did, her words carried power. Soldiers on both sides straightened when they heard her voice. She seemed carved from steel, untouchable and unshakable. And yet Marcus noticed the smaller things others did not. The way her hand tightened into a fist whenever the word surrender was mentioned. The way her helmet tilted ever so slightly when humans spoke of their dreams beyond war. The way she stood motionless, but her armor seemed heavier on her shoulders, as though it was more than just protection. It was a burden. One evening, after the long sessions of negotiation, Marcus found himself wandering outside the palace grounds. The gardens of Velara were unlike anything on Earth. Trees with crystal-like leaves hummed softly, releasing glowing pollen that drifted through the air like tiny lanterns. He sat on a stone bench, breathing in the strange scents, letting his guard down for the first time in weeks. He did not expect to hear the sound of armor approaching. Turning his head, he saw Kaelira stepping into the garden. She was alone, without guards, her armor still gleaming in the dim light. For a moment, Marcus thought he should leave, give her space, but before he could rise, she spoke. "You are different from the others," she said. Her voice was softer, this time, lacking the edge of command. Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "I don't know if that's good or bad." "Neither do I," she replied. She stood there, silent, and Marcus felt the weight of the moment. He had been trained to respect, rank to keep his distance, but something about her presence invited honesty. He found himself saying, "I've seen warriors before, many, but you carry yourself like someone who fights even when there isn't a battle." For the first time, Kalira's helmet tilted back slightly, as though she was surprised. She didn't answer right away, but her silence told Marcus he had touched on something real. It was the beginning of something unexpected, something neither of them had planned. The next day, the palace was buzzing with activity. The humans and Valerans were preparing for another round of talks, and Marcus was assigned to stand guard near the council chamber. His job was simple: remain watchful, remain silent, and ensure no one stepped out of line. He had done this countless times before, but today felt different. His mind kept drifting to the encounter in the garden the night before. He could still hear the princess's words in his mind. "You are different from the others." It was not a compliment nor an insult, but something else, something heavier. He had spent years learning how to read people, how to catch the smallest hints of emotion even in hardened soldiers. But Kalira remained a mystery. When the council meeting ended, Marcus noticed her walking alone through the side corridors of the palace. Unlike the other Valeran nobles who always surrounded themselves with attendants, Kalira often chose solitude. Marcus knew it wasn't his place to follow, yet he found himself walking in the same direction, drawn by a pull he couldn't explain. The corridor led to a quiet training hall. Weapons of every kind hung on the walls: swords, staffs, spears, and strange energy blades that hummed faintly even at rest. Kalira stood in the center of the room, her armor still on, though she had removed her helmet. For the first time, Marcus saw her face. Her features were sharp yet graceful, with high cheekbones and eyes the color of deep silver. Her expression was calm, but her gaze carried the weight of someone who had seen too much for her years. She turned when she sensed him at the door, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You followed me," she said. Marcus froze, embarrassed. "I didn't mean to intrude. I was just curious," she finished for him. Her tone wasn't accusing. Instead, it held the faintest trace of amusement, as though she had expected him to deny it but was pleased that he did not. She walked toward the wall, running her hand lightly over one of the weapons before she turned back to him. "Tell me, human," she asked suddenly, "do you wonder what lies beneath this armor?" Her words cut through the air like a blade. Marcus blinked, taken aback. She had asked the question so directly, so suddenly, that he almost stumbled over his reply. For a moment he thought she was teasing him, but her expression was serious. The question wasn't about her appearance. He could sense that immediately. It was a test, perhaps even a trap. Most people, he realized, would answer with flattery, trying to impress her or speak about beauty. But Marcus knew enough about warriors to understand that her armor wasn't simply metal. It was her shield against the world. He drew in a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "I don't wonder what's beneath it," he said finally, "because I think I already know." Her silver eyes narrowed and she tilted her head slightly, intrigued. "Do you?" "Yes," Marcus continued, steadying his voice. "I think beneath that armor is someone who has carried too much responsibility for too long. Someone who has had to be strong every day, even when she wanted to rest. Someone who isn't allowed to be anything but perfect in the eyes of her people. That's what I think is beneath your armor." The silence that followed was heavy. Kalira stood motionless, her gaze locked on him, as though she was trying to measure the truth of his words. Marcus wondered if he had gone too far, if his honesty had crossed into insult. But then he saw it. A flicker in her eyes, a brief spark of surprise that she could not hide quickly enough. "You are bold," she said quietly. "Too bold for your own good, perhaps." Marcus gave a small shrug. "Maybe. But I'd rather be bold than blind. If I looked at you and only saw armor, I'd be no different from the others. I'd be ignoring the person who wears it." For the first time since they had met, Kalira looked away. She turned toward the weapons on the wall, her fingers tracing the edge of a blade. Her voice softened when she spoke again. "Do you know why I wear this armor even here, within the safety of the palace?" she asked. Marcus shook his head. "Because without it, I am vulnerable," she said. "Not in battle, but in the eyes of my people. To them I must always be the warrior princess. If they see me as anything less, they will question my strength. And if they question my strength, they will question my mother's rule. That is a weight I cannot allow." Her words carried no bitterness, only the steady tone of someone reciting a truth she had lived with for years. Marcus felt a pang of sympathy, not for a princess of an alien world, but for a person trapped in expectations. "Then maybe the armor isn't protecting you," he said gently. "Maybe it's imprisoning you." Her head snapped back toward him, eyes wide with shock. For a moment Marcus thought she would be angry. But instead she stood frozen, silent, as though the thought had never crossed her mind before. The tension in the room was thick. Kalira's expression softened, but her silence continued. She did not answer, did not move. And Marcus knew he had struck something deep. He wanted to say more, but he held back. Sometimes silence was stronger than words. Finally, Kalira turned away, placing her helmet back over her head. The mask of the warrior returned, hiding the flicker of emotion he had glimpsed. When she spoke again, her voice was steady, almost cold. "You are unlike the others, Marcus of Earth. That is clear. But be careful with your words. Truth can cut deeper than any blade." Marcus nodded. So can silence. Her head tilted slightly again, but she said nothing more. She walked past him, her armor clinking softly with each step, leaving Marcus alone in the hall. He stood there for a long time, staring at the empty doorway. He knew he had crossed a line, but he also knew something important had happened. He had seen a glimpse of the person beneath the armor, the one no one else seemed to notice. And though she had tried to hide it, Marcus could tell that his answer had shocked her. The training hall felt colder after Kalira left, though Marcus knew it was only his mind playing tricks. He stood there for a while, replaying the conversation in his head. He hadn't meant to challenge her so directly, but the words had slipped out before he could stop them. He had spoken from instinct, from honesty, and perhaps that was why they struck so deeply. For the rest of the evening, he tried to push it from his mind. He returned to his quarters, ate the standard rations given to the human soldiers, and wrote his daily report for his commanders. But even as he described the diplomatic progress and the careful balance of peace, his thoughts drifted back to the princess. The way her eyes had widened when he said the armor imprisoned her, the silence that followed, the weight of the unspoken words between them. The next day, Marcus expected to be ignored. He thought Kalira would avoid him, that she would push the memory aside and pretend nothing had happened. Yet when he entered the council chamber, he found her already standing by the throne of her mother, the queen. Her helmet was on again, her armor gleaming in the morning light. But when her gaze swept across the humans, it lingered on Marcus for a heartbeat longer than necessary. It was brief, but he noticed. Throughout the meeting, Kalira remained silent. The queen spoke of treaties, resource exchanges, and promises of peace. The Velaran generals pushed for harsher terms, while the human diplomats argued for fairness. Marcus stood still, his eyes scanning the room, his mind sharp and focused. But beneath that focus was a quiet awareness. He could feel Kalira's presence like a storm cloud waiting at the edge of the sky. When the council ended, Marcus followed the other humans out, but before he could leave the hall, a voice stopped him. "Human soldier." He turned to see Kalira standing at the far end of the chamber. The guards had already filed out, leaving her alone. Slowly, she walked toward him, each step deliberate. When she was close enough, she lifted her helmet and placed it under her arm. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried something he hadn't seen before, a flicker of uncertainty. "You spoke yesterday as if you knew me," she said quietly. "As if you could see through me. Do you realize what you risk when you speak to me in such a way?" Marcus held her gaze, refusing to look away. "I wasn't trying to offend you. I only said what I believed." Her lips pressed into a thin line, but her eyes softened slightly. "And yet your words struck me harder than any weapon I have faced. No one has dared to say such things to me. Not my people, not my council, not even my mother. Do you understand why?" "Because they're afraid," Marcus answered without hesitation. The corner of her mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "Yes, they fear me. Or rather, they fear what I represent. To them, I am not Kalira, the daughter. I am Kalira, the warrior, a symbol of strength, a shield for the crown. If they saw me as anything else, the image would break." She paused, lowering her voice until it was barely more than a whisper. "But when you said the armor imprisons me, I could not stop thinking about it. The thought followed me into my sleep. It unsettled me." Marcus shifted uneasily. He had not meant to plant such a thought, but he could see now how deeply it had cut. "Maybe it unsettled you because it was true," he said gently. Her eyes narrowed again, but this time there was no anger. Instead, there was something raw, something vulnerable. She looked at him for a long time before speaking again. "You are bold, human, and dangerous. Not because you carry weapons, but because you carry truths that no one dares to speak." Marcus gave a small shrug. "Sometimes the truth is all we have." For a moment, silence hung between them. Then, to Marcus's surprise, Kalira laughed softly. It was not mocking nor sharp, but quiet, like a sound she rarely allowed herself to make. "You are unlike anyone I have ever met," she admitted. "And I do not know whether that is a gift or a curse." She turned to leave, but then stopped, glancing back at him over her shoulder. "Be careful, Marcus. You may have shocked me once, but shock can turn to suspicion quickly. Others will not take your words as lightly as I did." And with that, she walked away, her armor catching the light as she disappeared down the corridor. Marcus remained rooted to the spot, his mind racing. He had seen something shift in her today. The mask she wore, the unbreakable shell of the warrior princess, had cracked, just slightly, but enough to show the person underneath. And he knew one thing for certain: she would never look at him the same way again. That night, Marcus lay awake in his quarters, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling. He thought of her laughter, brief as it was, and the way her voice had softened when she admitted his words haunted her. For the first time, he realized how lonely she must be, surrounded by respect yet starved of honesty. He wondered what would happen if others discovered their conversations. Would it ruin the fragile peace? Would it place him in danger? Or would it somehow build a bridge between their worlds? The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. His answer had not only shocked her, it had begun to change her. And that change, however small, could alter the path of everything that followed. The days that followed carried a strange rhythm. Marcus continued his duty, standing watch during the council meetings, training with his fellow soldiers, and walking the palace grounds during his free hours. But beneath that routine, something had changed. Every time Kalira entered the chamber, every time her gaze passed over him, he felt a quiet current between them. It wasn't spoken, yet it was there. A silent recognition that could not be denied. One afternoon, after a long and heated debate between the two sides, Marcus was dismissed from duty earlier than expected. The palace halls were quieter than usual. Following instinct more than reason, he wandered toward the gardens once more, where the crystal-leaved trees glowed faintly in the fading light. He expected solitude, but instead he found Kalira waiting near the fountain. She was not wearing her helmet, and her armor looked heavier in the dim glow, as if she had been carrying its weight all day. "You walk here often?" she said as he approached. Marcus offered a half smile. And you seem to find me here just as often. For a brief moment, her expression softened. She motioned for him to sit beside her on the stone edge of the fountain. He did, careful to keep a respectful distance. The sound of water trickling into the basin filled the silence until she spoke again. Tell me, Marcus, she said quietly, what burdens do you carry? The question surprised him. He had expected her to speak of politics or training, not of something so personal. He hesitated, then answered honestly. I carry memories of battles I fought, of comrades I lost. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see their faces again. I wonder if I could have done more, if I could have saved them. That is the weight I carry beneath my armor. Her silver eyes studied him with quiet intensity. And yet you stand tall. You do not show it. He nodded, slowly, because if I let it show, I might break, and soldiers can't afford to break. At least, that's what I was taught. Kalira lowered her gaze to the water, her reflection rippling. It seems we are alike, you and I. Always strong, always unbroken, at least in the eyes of others. Something in her voice told Marcus that she had been waiting to say these words, waiting for someone who would truly listen. He realized then how rare honesty must be for her, surrounded as she was by people who only saw the princess, never the person. Over the following days, their conversations grew longer. Sometimes they spoke in the gardens, other times in quiet corners of the palace where no one would interrupt. Marcus told her about Earth, about the oceans that stretched farther than the eye could see, about cities that glowed with lights at night, about the small joys of his childhood that had nothing to do with war. Kalira listened with fascination, her questions revealing a hunger to know more of the world beyond her own. In return, she shared pieces of her life. She spoke of the endless training that began when she was a child, of the expectations placed upon her shoulders, of the silence that followed her wherever she went. She admitted, almost reluctantly, that sometimes she wished she could disappear into the crowd, just to know what it felt like to be ordinary. Through these talks, a bond began to form. It was not quick nor simple, but steady and undeniable. Marcus found himself looking forward to her presence, her questions, even her silences. And Kalira, though she tried to remain distant, often sought him out when the day's duties ended. One evening, as they walked along the garden path, Marcus noticed her slowing, her steps heavier than usual. You're tired, he said gently. She gave a small nod. The armor grows heavier each day. Not the metal, but the image it creates. I am weary of being the princess who must never falter. Marcus looked at her, then spoke softly. Maybe you don't have to carry it alone anymore. She turned to him, surprise flickering in her eyes. For a moment, she seemed on the edge of saying something, but instead she gave a small nod and walked on. That night, Marcus realized the truth. He was no longer just a soldier guarding peace. He was part of her life now, part of the weight she carried. And though it frightened him, it also gave him purpose. The fragile peace between humans and Valarans was always at risk. Every day Marcus heard whispers of generals who distrusted the treaty, of warriors who longed for battle again. The council chamber was tense, every word chosen with care, every promise weighed with suspicion. It felt like a single spark could reignite the flames of war. That spark came one morning when a heated argument broke out between the two delegations. A Valaran general accused the humans of deceit, claiming they were hiding their true strength. The human diplomats pushed back, their voices rising in protest. The atmosphere thickened, and Marcus could see hands drifting too close to weapons. It was Kalira who rose. She stepped into the center of the chamber, her presence commanding silence. Removing her helmet, she looked first to her mother, then to the humans, and finally to the Valaran generals. Her voice carried across the hall, firm and unshaking. You see only enemies where there could be allies, she declared. You see only armor and weapons, never the people who wear them. I have stood among the humans. I have spoken with them, And I tell you this, they are not here to conquer. They are here to endure, just as we are. Her words startled many, but it was what she said next that truly shocked the chamber. I have come to trust one of them, a soldier named Marcus. He did not see me as a weapon nor as a princess, but as a person, and it is that vision we must embrace if we are to survive together. If we cannot trust, then we will destroy ourselves. The hall erupted in murmurs. Some of the generals glared at her with disbelief, while the human diplomats exchanged astonished looks. Even the queen regarded her daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. But Kalira stood tall, her gaze unwavering. Later that evening, Marcus found himself summoned to a quiet chamber. Kalira was waiting there, her armor set aside, her expression unreadable. For a long moment she simply looked at him, as though measuring the truth of her own words. You saw beneath my armor before I did, she said softly. Marcus felt the weight of her admission. Sometimes it's easier to see what others cannot, because we're standing outside the burden. But the strength was always yours, Kalira. You just needed someone to remind you. For the first time she smiled, not the faint twitch of lips she gave in counsel, but a true smile, one that reached her eyes. Perhaps, but know this, Marcus, your presence has changed more than you realize. Not only me, but the way others now look at humans. The path ahead will still be difficult, but it will not be as it was before. Silence settled between them, but it was a comfortable silence full of understanding. The bond they had built, fragile yet strong, had become something greater than either had expected. Marcus realized then that the question she had once asked him, "Do you wonder what lies beneath this armor?" was no longer a riddle or a test. It was a bridge, one that had connected two lives, two worlds, and perhaps even two futures. And for the first time since he had stepped foot on Velara, Marcus felt hope.